So when I've seen these consistent metabolic, nutritional, and endocrine imbalances, I appreciate Dr. Ben Lynch's work in his evidence-based pathway planners, because it just was a keynote for me when I saw that the LPS can affect these specific enzymes, and that's actually going to come up in my case. Then one of the things that I see as a pattern is that when we've had failed treatment from experts, I mean, these people are phenomenal at what they do, and it's kind of everybody scratching their head as to why it's not working. And so one of the things I look at is, have they even asked about a food poisoning history potentially? Not everyone remembers. And have they just maybe run the antibodies? Because that, for sure, we have to address this as an autoimmune disease or an autoimmune situation. And so the one thing that I found that was very interesting after listening to a speaker present was he was finding and looking at sex hormone binding globulin. So I started taking a look at this, and the bacteria can actually produce excess estrogens, but we're also talking about estrogens from medications and from the environment again, okay? So I look at the epigenetic factors of environmental toxins, and I look at the food poisoning as an environmental toxin in that sense, but it is affecting the epigenetics. And we can clearly see that we have an autoimmune response. What else affects the gut? Well, there are studies about the MTHFR polymorphisms in IBS even. And of course, that does get more complicated when you look further down at other single nucleotide polymorphisms, or otherwise known as SNPs. That's what we abbreviate that as. So what I notice is that when we've had these xenoestrogens, the endocrine response is actually an elevation in the sex hormone binding globulin. And interestingly enough, we can actually do something about this. So, sex hormone binding globulin, I'm going to skip through and kind of abbreviate this, where I'm looking at this as my forecast for the extent of toxic load. Okay, so we talk about estrogen dominance as being as a toxicity or an imbalance. So I'm kind of including endogenous and exogenous estrogens in this. In 1972, we had an article in Nature where this was the reference range for men and women, okay? And this is typically what I see. In fact, one of the medical doctors that I'm working with says he's never seen men with this high of sex hormone binding globulin. And these are my patients that are very, very difficult to treat. And of course, Dr. Rabar has me now thinking about Lyme in some of these cases. However, I'm also finding a consistent finding here. More specifically in the women, it's typically over 100. And my most challenging cases have been over 200. So what I'm going to show here actually is we had this wonderful list about the associated conditions on the SIBO info. And I wanted to go ahead and say, okay, do we have an overlap? Possibly. And interestingly enough, I was able to find studies that correlated these things also with a hormone etiology, and very well presented. Those items that are larger font and have the asterisks, those are conditions that myself and this other physician have had great successes with. I see this got a little moved around here, but what I'm wanting to focus on is the overlap, as it was nicely in the intersection of IBS, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis.